standing in the driveway of my own house, holding a bag of groceries, when I saw my son-in-law's truck parked in front of the garage. That stopped me cold. My daughter had told me he was in Winnipeg for a work conference. She'd mentioned it 3 times over the past week, almost like she wanted to make sure I remembered. So why was his truck sitting there, engine still ticking like it had just arrived? I set the groceries down on the front step and stood there for a moment in the cold November air. My breath came out in small clouds. It was one of those clear Manitoba days where the sky is so blue it almost looks fake and the cold cuts right through your jacket no matter how many layers you got on. I'm 64 years old. I've lived in this province my whole life. I know that kind of cold. I also know when something doesn't add up. My name is Warren, and I want to tell you what happened to me over the past year and a half. Because I think a lot of people my age need to hear it. Not because it's a feel-good story. Parts of it are anything but because I made it through. And I want you to know that you can too. My wife passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. We'd been married 31 years, and losing her was like losing the floor beneath my feet. For a long time, I just went through the motions. Got up, ate something, went to work at the hardware distribution company I'd built up over 22 years, came home, went to bed, repeat. My daughter Renee, she's my youngest, 36 now. She was the one who pulled me back. She'd come over on Sunday afternoons and we'd sit at the kitchen table and she'd make tea the way her mother used to, with the loose leaves and the old ceramic pot. She never said much about grief, never pushed. She was just there. I'm not ashamed to say she saved me a little. So when she married Claude, I trusted him because she trusted him. He was from Quebec originally, bilingual, worked in commercial real estate, polished, always said the right things. I remember thinking at the wedding that he was maybe a little too smooth for my taste. But I wrote that off as a father, being protective. He made her happy. That was what mattered. 4 years into their marriage, I decided it was time to start thinking about stepping back from the business. My accountant, a woman named Doris who'd been doing my books for 15 years, had been telling me for 2 years that I should formalize a succession plan. I had a few key employees who'd been with me a long time, and I'd been thinking about bringing in family. Claude had approached me himself actually about 18 months before all this happened. He wanted to transition out of real estate, he said. He wanted to build something with longevity. He talked about keeping it in the family, about what I'd built, about legacy. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee. When my 6 in the morning. It was just past 6 in the morning. Would handle my legal work since I incorporated. I gave Claude access to the supplier accounts, the procurement system, the banking portal. Not full signing authority. Not yet, but enough to do the job. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was trusting a man because my daughter loved him. Those are different things. I know that now. Standing in my driveway that November afternoon, I picked up my groceries and went around to the back door instead of the front. I don't know exactly why. Some instinct. The back door opens into the mudroom and then into the kitchen. And from the kitchen you can hear everything that happens in a living room if the doors are open. The doors were open. Claude's voice first. She still doesn't know how the accounts work. She thinks it's all through the corporate card. Then my daughter's voice, quieter, tighter. She doesn't need to know. That's the point. I put the groceries down on the mudroom floor very slowly, so they wouldn't make a sound. Claude again. Doris is going to notice if we don't move on this before the fiscal year closes. She's sharp. Doris is 67, my daughter said. Warren's already talking about letting her go when he cuts back. After that, we bring in our own people. I stood in that mudroom for what felt like a long time. My hand was still on the handle of the grocery bag. Outside, the wind had picked up and I could hear it moving through the trees at the back of the yard. The big spruce my wife had planted the year we moved in. Still there. Still standing. I waited until I heard them move toward the other end of the house. And then I went back out the way I'd come in, got in my truck, and drove to the parking lot of the Tim Hortons 2 kilometers down the road. I sat there with the engine running and tried to think clearly. The first thing I felt was not anger. It was something older and quieter than that. A kind of grief, actually. Because I'd heard my daughter's voice and it hadn't sounded like the woman who made tea on Sunday afternoons. It sounded like someone who had been planning something for a while. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink. Then I drove to Doris's office. Doris McPhail is not the kind of woman you surprise. She's been in accounting for 35 years, and she has a way of looking at you over her reading glasses that makes you feel like she's already run the numbers on whatever you're about to say. I walked in without an appointment and she took one look at my face and said, "Sit down, Warren." I told her what I'd heard. Not the emotional version, I kept that to myself. Just the facts. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she pulled up the corporate account on her screen and started scrolling. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "When did Claude get added to the secondary procurement account?" I told her I hadn't added him to that account. I'd given him access to the main operational account for supplier payments. The secondary one held the buffer funds. Working capital reserves, HST installments, things like that. He shouldn't have had access to it at all. Doris typed something, looked at the screen, typed something else. Her expression didn't change, which with Doris is how you know something is actually wrong. "There have been 12 transfers out of the secondary account in the past 9 months, she said, ranging from $8,000 to $42,000. All coded as supplier advance payments, all to the same numbered company. I felt the coffee I hadn't drunk sit heavy in my stomach anyway." "How much total?" She looked at the screen. "Just under $220,000. I went home that night and I didn't say anything. Renee called at 7:30, like she often did. And I answered and I talked to her about nothing. The weather, a hockey game, whether I'd looked at the new furnace courts, and my voice sounded completely normal to me. I don't know how. Some part of me was still sitting in that mudroom with my hand on a grocery bag. After I hung up, I sat in my wife's chair by the window. The green one she always said was too comfortable to get rid of. And I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be through this. Not a man who falls apart. I decided that before I decided anything else. The next morning, I called Frank Bellamy's office and left a message. Frank called back by noon. I told him the basics. He was quiet for a moment and then he said carefully, "Warren, I need to tell you something. Claude came to see me 3 weeks ago. Said you'd asked him to explore options for a formal transfer of assets. I told him I'd need to hear that from you directly before I'd proceed. He said you were thinking it through." There was a long pause on the line. "He was laying groundwork," Frank said. "I know," I said. "You need someone independent for this. Not me. I've had contact with him now, even if it was brief. Call Margaret Souza at Lakewood Legal. She doesn't know your family at all. That's what you need right now." I wrote the meme down. I want to pause here and tell you something directly, because I know some of you listening to this are older, and some of you might be in a situation that rhymes with mine even if the details are different. People will tell you that getting older means you slow down, that you get confused, that your judgment isn't what it was. I have heard variations of this from people I once trusted, and I am here to tell you that the opposite of confusion is not youth. It is paying attention. It is taking your time. It is refusing to let the urgency someone else has manufactured become your urgency. Claude wanted things to move quickly. That was always the pressure. Let's get the transition paperwork done before year end. Let's consolidate the accounts to simplify things for when you're ready to step back. Let's. Urgency is a tool. I should have recognized that sooner. Margaret Souza met me at her office on a Wednesday afternoon. She had a small firm on Portage Avenue, tidy and no nonsense, her degrees and a couple of landscape photographs on the wall and nothing else. She listened to everything I said and then she asked about 3 questions, all of them sharp and specific. Then she said, "We're going to do a few things in a particular order. Don't deviate from the order." The first thing was a forensic accounting review. She brought in a firm independent of Doris. Not because she doubted Doris, but because for what we need to do legally, the audit had to be airtight. The firm came back within 3 weeks. The numbered company receiving the transfers was registered in Ontario. Claude was the sole director. The transfers had started 4 months after he joined the business. The second thing was to change every password, every access credential, and every banking authorization quietly and over a single weekend. So there was no window for him to move money before he realized the access was gone. Margaret coordinated this with Doris. I didn't tell Renee. That was the hardest part of the whole thing. Not the legal work, not the audit, not facing what the audit showed. Not telling my daughter. I kept thinking about those Sunday afternoons, the loose-leaf tea, the ceramic pot. The third thing was a formal letter from Margaret's office sent registered mail to Claude at the business address and at their home. notifying him that his employment agreement was terminated effective immediately, that his access to all company systems had been revoked, and that a full forensic audit had been completed, and the findings would be forwarded to the RCMP Commercial Crime Unit. In Canada, that's who handles this kind of thing. Financial fraud at this scale doesn't go to the local detachment, it goes up the chain. My daughter called me 40 minutes after the letter arrived. I could tell from her voice that she'd been crying, and that she was furious, and that she wasn't sure which one to be more. Dad, what have you done? I protected what your mother and I built, I said. That's what I've done. She said some things after that I'm going to leave out of this. They were hard to hear. She accused me of being paranoid, of letting Doris manipulate me because I was lonely, of not understanding how business works. She said Claude was trying to help me and I'd humiliated him. She said I'd chosen a business over my family. I didn't argue. I just let her talk until she ran out of words. When she stopped, I said, when you're ready to hear what he actually did, I'll show you everything. It's all documented. Until then, I love you. That hasn't changed. She hung up. I went and sat in the green chair again and I cried. I'm not embarrassed by that either. The RCMP investigation took several months. I won't walk through all of it because I don't fully understand all of it. Financial crime investigations are slow and complicated, and they involve a lot of waiting. What I can tell you is that Claude was eventually charged with fraud over $5,000 and breach of trust. In Canada, fraud over $5,000 is an indictable offense. He was looking at serious time. His lawyer tried to negotiate. Margaret handled all of it. She was worth every dollar. Somewhere in the middle of all this, something happened that I hadn't expected. Renee asked to meet me. Not at the house. She suggested the Tim Hortons, which I thought was interesting, because it was the same one I'd driven to the day I overheard them in my living room. I don't know if she knew that. We sat across from each other with coffees we actually drank this time, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a while. She had her mother's eyes. She'd always had her mother's eyes. She said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. I told her I would. Did you know, she said, when you were talking to me on the phone that night, after you'd only found out? Did you know then? Yes, I said. She looked at the table. How did you sound so normal? Because I didn't want to lose you over a phone call, I said. Some things deserve a real conversation. She told me then, her version of things. Claude had come to her with the idea initially framed as protecting the business, making sure that if I died suddenly, the assets didn't get tied up in probate, that there was a structure in place. It used a lot of language she didn't fully understand, and she trusted him because he was her husband, and because she didn't want to think of herself as someone who would go through her father's finances. He'd been reassuring and confident, and she'd gone along with it longer than she should have. I didn't know about the transfers, she said. I want you to know that. I didn't know. I believed her. I still believe her. Partly because of what Doris found. The account was in his name alone, nothing tied to Renee legally. And partly because I know my daughter, despite everything. She has her mother's honesty as well as her eyes. You were in the house that day, I said. I heard you say you didn't need me to understand how the accounts worked. She closed her eyes. He'd been telling me for weeks that you were starting to forget things. That Doris was covering for you. He made it sound like we were protecting you from yourself. She opened her eyes. I believed him. I hate that I believed him. That was harder to hear than the angry phone call, honestly. We sat there for a while. The Tim Hortons was busy. It's always busy in November. People coming in from the cold, stomping snow off their boots, the smell of coffee and Timbits and wet coats. Normal life moving around us while we tried to figure out what was left of ours. Claude accepted a plea agreement. He repaid $180,000, some of it from savings, the rest from liquidating assets he had before we married. The remaining $40,000 was written off as the cost of the education I got from this experience. He avoided prison time, which I have mixed feelings about. But Margaret told me that recovering the money was the more important outcome for me personally. And she wasn't wrong. He and Renee divorced within 6 months of the charges. She kept the condo. He moved back to Quebec. I've heard from him once since then. A short email, no subject line, that just said, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much. He was right that it doesn't mean much. But I'd read it twice, which tells me something about me that I'm still working on. Here's what I want to say about Doris. Because she deserves it, I gave her a raise, a bonus, and the option to continue working with me on her own terms for as long as she wants. She is 67 years old, and she has more professional integrity than anyone else I have worked with in over 2 decades of running a business. Nobody is letting her go. And here's what I want to say to anyone who is where I was. Not in the specifics, but in that feeling of sitting in a cold parking lot trying to decide what kind of person you're going to be through something that shouldn't be happening to you. You are not confused. You are not past your usefulness. You're not easier to fool than anyone else. If anything, you have been watching people your whole life and you know more than you think you know. That instinct that made me go around to the back door instead of the front, that's not luck. That's 64 years of paying attention. Trusted. Renee and I are okay. Not all the way okay. Some things broke that are still being put back together piece by piece. The way you do with anything that matters. But she comes over on Sunday afternoons again. We don't do the tea yet, but we're getting there. The big spruce in the backyard is still standing. My wife planted it the year we moved in the spring, and it's taken 30 years to get to the size it is now. Some things need time to grow strong enough to survive a hard winter. I think about that sometimes. I still think about that back door sometimes. The fact that I went around instead of through the front. I don't have a good explanation for it. Just something in me that said go slowly. Pay attention. I've spent a lot of time since then wondering what would have happened if I hadn't listened to that feeling. If I had walked in through the front, called out a hello, and Claude had smiled and made something up and I'd believed him. It could have gone that way. It almost did, for months before that day. What I've come to understand is that the choices that protect us are rarely dramatic. They're quiet. They look like going around to the back door. They look like driving to an accountant's office instead of going home to sit with the shock. They look like calling a lawyer you've never met and telling her the truth in order without the emotional parts getting in the way. None of that felt like strength when I was doing it. It felt like just getting through the next hour. But that's what integrity actually looks like, I think. Not a big declaration. Just doing the next right thing when doing nothing would be easier. Claude counted on me not looking closely. He counted on the idea that a man in his 60s who's just lost his wife and is thinking about slowing down doesn't have the sharpness left to catch what's being done to him. That assumption, that age is the same as diminishment, was the foundation his whole plan rested on. And it was wrong. Not because I'm exceptional. Because paying attention doesn't expire. Because the judgment you build over a lifetime of running something, of watching people, of learning the hard way what trust looks like and what it doesn't, that doesn't go away. It gets quieter maybe, but it's there. Renee was deceived by someone she loved, and I've had to hold both things at once. The hurt of what she said to me on the phone, and the understanding that she was also a victim of a man who knew exactly how to use her blind spots against her. That's taken some work. I won't pretend it came easily, but I think the willingness to hold that complexity, to not flatten her into a villain because it would be simpler, that's also part of getting through something like this with yourself intact. The $220,000 was money my wife and I built together over years of early mornings and slow growth and reinvested earnings and saying no to things we wanted, so the business would be stronger. Losing most of that hurt in a way that wasn't just financial. It felt like someone had reached back into our shared history and taken something. But the thing Claude didn't understand, the thing people who scheme like that never seem to understand, is that what you build with your hands and your integrity can be rebuilt. It takes longer the second time. You're tireder. But you know how, because you've done it before. Doris is still with me. Renee comes over on Sundays. The spruce is still standing. Some things, once they're rooted deep enough, don't come down in a hard winter. They just wait it out.